Diagwit, Daniel Manning with Japan Forward, and today I'm joined in the studio by Kailene Falls. She's a Tokyo-based illustrator and she's renowned for her beautiful watercolored illustrations of food. She's worked for major brands, NHK, she's published books, and today she's here in the studio to tell us all about it. So Kailene, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today.
Okay, so your background is in graphic design for Japanese companies.
Yes and no. Actually, I started out, it was about in high school, where I started having an interest in art and design.
Okay.
I actually wanted to become an illustrator right off the bat, but it didn't seem like a practical job. And so I thought if I studied graphic design, that would be a place to be able to use my illustrations. And it was at that time when I realized that I was also interested in studying foreign languages.
Okay.
And it seemed like Japanese would be an interesting language to study from a graphic perspective, because they've got the kanji. There's also a lot of very interesting graphic elements in Japanese design in general. It's pretty well known across the world. And so I started studying Japanese, fell in love with the culture. And then it was at that point where I had to make a decision about, well, I would like to work in Japan one day, but what is the best way to do that? Should I go to Japan and study there, or should I stay in the US? And I actually decided to stay in the US because I figured if I studied Japanese graphic design in Japan, then I would just be a Japanese graphic designer with a lower level of Japanese. Whereas if I studied in the US, then I could be an American designer with an acceptable level of Japanese, and it would be easier to market myself. And so after graduation, I came here and I worked as a packaging designer. So I worked in a lot of food packaging.
Okay.
So that's like the things that you buy, like specifically at like the supermarket and the convenience store. I was able to illustrate for those. I was able to work with photographers for those. It was a really good experience. But midway, I started realizing that I had more joy when an illustration of mine was used in a design than when I actually designed a product.
Right.
And it was at the time where I think it was about the 5-year mark, a little bit less, when the amount of overtime was starting to get to me. It was like a lot of, they call it service or sabisu zangyo, so service overtime, where you're kind of unpaid.
The best kind of overtime.
Yeah, the best kind of overtime, where you like, especially in my case, sometimes I really was very busy, but sometimes I just had to be there to show that I was there. And I realized I'd come to the country that I'd long sought to live in, but wasn't able to find the time to really enjoy it that much. And so I started thinking about becoming an illustrator at that time. I thought about a number of different subjects, but I kind of settled on food illustration as my senmon, as my specialty, because there's a love for food in Japan. There's a need for food illustration in like publishing and packaging design. I had experience in the back, as my background, and I also really like to eat. So it was about that time too where I also got the opportunity to appear in Japanese TV, so the NHK World type of shows, where I had an amazing overlap, again, of working with somebody, they call it food reporting,
right.
Shokurepo. So going to different areas of Japan, eating different foods. And in the case of my shokurepo, it was primarily for an international audience, people who are interested in Japan and want to learn about Japanese food. So kind of right now, I still do some graphic design work, freelance, primarily do illustration, and I do TV entertainment type of stuff. So I've got kind of like many different pots going at the same time.
Okay. So can I just ask you, like regarding shokurepo, like reporting on food, my ability to report on food is like zero.
Yeah.
It's either good or bad. Did you have to, is that something you have to kind of consciously work on to develop like lots of different ways to say something is good or bad?
The first time I got a job to do a shokurepo, I literally was looking up beforehand so Japan uses a lot of onomatope or onomatopoeia, which are like words that describe the texture of something. So neba is kind of like slimy, or saku is like crispy. And I was like looking them up frantically beforehand. I was like, I got to memorize all these things because I want to do a good shokurepo. And yeah, I think it's a combination. I mean, when I first came to Japan, I was delicious, not delicious. And then I started being interested in Japanese food and realizing Japan's food tends to not have a lot of spices and flavors, and so you actually, if you want to really enjoy it, it's very interesting to pay attention to individual ingredients.
Right.
So I'd started, having a little bit of that knowledge, and then I was painting food too. And so when I was painting food, I was kind of trying to write up descriptions of what I'd eaten. So I had like a little bit of a base knowledge, but still, doing it on the spot in Japanese was quite tricky. But as time has gone on, you definitely, it's a skill that I would say both you improve at the skill, and the skill improves your sense of like flavor.
Right.
So once I started doing food reporting, even when I'm out on for my own private time going to a restaurant, I'm like, oh wait, there's this interesting combination of flavors, and then I'm trying to eat it, and I'm like, wait, what am I tasting here? Wait, there's a little bit of this in here, a little bit of that in there, and it becomes like a very fun overall experience. But it's definitely a muscle that needs to be worked, and I say that because I have my significant other right now. He had zero interest in food at all, right. And then we've been dating, and he has gotten really quite good at it now. He if you make the effort, to be aware, mindful as you're eating, you start becoming really interested in the process of it. Oh wait, I can see the first what comes is the bitterness of this chocolate, and then after that you get a little bit of the subtlety of a peanut coming through,
right.
And then you get, so things have stages, etc. So keeping awareness of that and developing that awareness is something that absolutely can be done.
Okay. So just backtracking a bit, you mentioned that you work for NHK World.
Yes.
So as a reporter for NHK World, you communicate Japanese culture to an international audience. And in doing that, how do you sort of moderate your interviewing style or your storytelling? But at the same time, for an international audience, but at the same time, retaining, the sort of authenticity of Japanese culture.
Yeah, so one thing that's very interesting is when you're interviewing farmers, or you're interviewing chefs, things that are sort of atarimae, things that are just a given,
right,
are not a given for an international audience. And so I have to kind of make sure that along the way I say, well, where I'm from in America, we've actually never see this food, and so I have to look at the camera and kind of explain what the flavors I'm tasting in. So the main thing, especially with food reporting, is finding similar ingredients to explain to an international audience. But also style-wise, one thing is Japanese TV, this is not just in the case for NHK World, but it's just Japanese TV in general, likes it when you ham it up quite a bit. So they like very extreme reactions. My theory is that Japanese people are working very hard and they're really tired all the time, and so when they come home and they turn the TV on, they want something they could easily understand and not put too much effort into. It doesn't add to their stress or add to their tiredness. And plus, Japanese people love food, so you're so used to turning on the TV and seeing oishii, oishii, delicious, delicious. And so it's finding that balance, because most of the directors that I work with don't actually speak English.
Right.
They work with people who write some of the scripts or write some of the narrations that speak English, but they themselves don't speak English. And so they will hire and continue to call back reporters that kind of appeal to their style.
Right.
And so if you go too far into the Western style, which is very subtle, I see, and then thinking about it and being a little bit more calm about it and not hyping it up or anything, then you're not going to get called back a second time to do reporting. And so it really is trying to find that balance where I'm making sure I'm describing the flavors. I'm not just saying, oh, this is delicious. I need to be detailed about what tastes like what, but at the same time appreciating it, which isn't hard because the directors are going out of their way to find the very best. For example, I did a pineapple filming back in April, and the very best pineapple tarts and the very best pineapple yakiniku, and so there really isn't a time where I'm eating it and being like, this is not good. It's all really delicious. And so it's really trying to find that balance between the two.
Okay. So what do you think you've learned from working in cross-cultural media here in Japan? What are the sort of cultural differences or surprises you like to highlight?
I mean, I think that question can be answered in a number of different ways. I mean, what I was previously talking about what is expected for people on TV is quite different. But one thing that I found very culturally interesting is that I don't only appear on NHK World, I also appear on local Japanese variety TV shows. Right. And something that was very surprising when I came here is how strict the hierarchy is in Japanese TV.
Yeah.
And so it's like the directors and the AD, they're like, oh, or the AD or the assistant directors are
Yeah.
like, they're all like, very polite to you, and they're like trying to make sure you're with. But then you've got the next tier up, which is like the host of the show, etc. And it was very surprising to be like, oh, I've worked with this person for a really long time, and yet I would feel very uncomfortable like going out and talking to them, because you're not supposed to talk to them. You're supposed to they're all like segmented, and there's different hierarchy levels in that. Now, I think things have gotten slightly better, but at the same time, that was maybe perhaps one of the biggest culture shocks, is that there's not really, it almost is like the people in the other ranks from you are not really like, you don't consider them like a casual person. It's like, this is like a boss, or this is like a whatever. Like, you wouldn't just go, hey, how's it going? Like, So inversely, when you actually are able to break those barriers, and it takes quite a while, then it becomes quite like, oh, wow, like I was finally able to like get the contact information for this person, and I can talk to them more on like a casual basis. But it takes a long time, and I think that's the same actually with Japanese society in general. Is there's the concept of those that are close to you, and then those that are outside of your bubble, and you're very polite to those outside of your bubble. But at the same time, it's hard to get a very tight, meaningful and deep relationship. It takes a long time, and so. That's something that's just very different. In the U.S., we tend to be really, it can be fake. We can be very overly friendly, but at the same time, it's much quicker to get to that deep level from a U.S. relationship standpoint.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm from Minnesota in the U.S., and I do think culturally Minnesota has similarities to Japan, because there is that sort of very polite, but a little bit standoffish aspect. And so it didn't feel particularly uncomfortable for me, but it's something that I've noticed both living and working here in offices as well as in the TV industry, is that sort of separation between like your casualness and being private, and at the same time, like honoring the other person and still being polite.
Okay. So you've written a number of books.
Yes.
One of them in particular, The Wonderful and Delicious in Japan. So it's a watercolor illustrated bilingual travel information guide. So what inspired you to write it? And how did you approach writing content that would be equally interesting for foreign readers and Japanese readers?
So this book that you're talking about is this book right here, which is my first book, Nihon no Imono Oishimono, which is available internationally, but you have to jump through some hoops. You have to like buy it off of Japanese Amazon and have it shipped internationally to you, which is a little bit unfortunate. But this book kind of came into fruition because I'm very much somebody who likes to vocalize my goals.
Right.
And I thought I loved art books. I buy art books myself, and I thought it'd be really cool to publish an art book one day. And at the point where I'd probably painted around 100, 150 illustrations, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to make a book about Japanese food culture. But I had been doing a job with a magazine at the time, and I had spoken with the editor of that magazine and said that, that someday I would like to do that. They actually came back to me a couple of years later and said, that book that you had talked about making, we'd like to make it with you, and we'd like to combine it with both like a culture guide, but also a travel guide.
A couple of years later.
A couple of years later, and they came to me
So
with the
Japanese,
proposal.
right?
Yes. I was like, whoa, okay. So the thing that's interesting about how this book turned out is if I had just made this an art book, it would really only be limited to people who liked to buy art books.
Right.
But because I worked with a publisher and an editor that makes travel guides, it has like all the shop information in there, as well as I decided, and this was a push on my end, is not writing it just in Japanese, even though it was going to be published in Japan. I really wanted to publish it both in Japanese and English. And that was partially because my social media following was about 15% Japanese, 15% US, and then 70% all around the world. And English is just the best language to kind of reach all sorts of different people. And then, I thought that also presented itself with a problem, like you said, in that writing content that is going to be interesting to Japanese people while also describing foods that foreigners have never seen before. Like, for example, we've got like hiyayakko, which is like a cold tofu dish.
Right.
Like a Japanese person is going to know what that is. And so just describing what the food is going to be boring to them. Whereas without that description in the English version, you're not going to know what it is. And so it was kind of striking that balance. And I decided to go with the direction of writing why it is interesting from a foreigner's perspective. So many Japanese people would consider these foods to be like everyday foods or things that you see all the time.
Right.
and seeing that food through new eyes. So seeing how a foreigner would think something like melon soda float is interesting when for them it's something that they've had since their childhood, is actually something Japanese people tend to really like. They really like when foreigners appreciate and show their appreciate their culture. And at the same time, I was able to describe what the foods were to a foreign audience. And also, one thing that was kind of like a wayside or a by-side benefit was that because it is relatively a direct translation of Japanese to English here, those who are studying Japanese can read the Japanese and compare it to the English,
Right.
and those that are studying English can vice versa. And so I know there's actually even a couple of schools that started using this a little bit as a textbook midway through. But yeah, so that was a very interesting project. It was kind of a dream come true. I'd always wanted to publish a book, and it took a lot of time. Actually, writing was the most difficult part because I'm so used to multitasking when I paint. I live stream or I listen to radio, and being able to having to just focus on writing, and writing in two languages is the most difficult aspect. But it was worth the effort because now it's been published in Korea and Taiwan and Spain as well. So it's kind of doing quite well, and which kind of led to my second book, which timing-wise is really good. It's actually just going to be released in June, which is all. This one is many of the same illustrations, but also some new ones done in a postcard format. So these ones have little blurbs about each piece, rather than a full big paragraph on them. But it's many different Japanese foods that I find interesting and visually beautiful. And this can be read like as a book, sent as postcards, as well as, I mean, I put a bunch of these up on my wall as like art direction as well. But yeah, so publishing a book was kind of always a dream of mine, and I wasn't expecting it, but it kind of came true a little bit faster than I thought it would. I'm also working actually next year, I think I'll be publishing a children's book as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, why food? What was it that sort of influenced you or your decision to pursue food as your kind of niche in illustration? And like, did you face any challenges in sort of creating your own unique sort of style within that field?
Yes, I could talk to Ian about this, but when it was time for me to, when I started considering becoming an illustrator, a freelance illustrator, I knew from personal experience working in the design industry that it's much better to focus on a single sort of subject and specialize in it, because it's easier to hire somebody that's known for a specific thing, because you can always imagine what the product is going to look like at the end. You can easily like, Google them and be like, oh, I need a food illustrator, I need a fashion illustrator, and they'll come up. It's just much easier to market yourself. So I was able to approach that from a designer's perspective. That being said, I didn't know what to specialize in. So I kind of at the time was trying all sorts of different stuff. I was out there sketching buildings, I was doing people, I was doing digital art. But the problem was that I was working in a graphic design firm for about 4.5 years, and during that time, I was digitally illustrating in different styles that were required for different projects. So it wasn't Kailene style, it was this style for this project and this style for this project, and got really good at imitating styles, but sort of lost my own in the way. So it was at that point that I decided I got to try a whole new media and see if I can force myself to learn something new or learn my own style that way.
Right.
And I ended up buying watercolor specifically because watercolor doesn't use white. So once it's down, it's down. And you can't midway go, oh, I actually want it to look more like this person's art or more like that person's art. It kind of forces itself to become whatever you naturally want to draw or paint. So I was looking for subjects to practice. I kind of did, like buildings and imaginary stuff. And one day on the way home from work, I stopped into a convenience store, and there was a dango, which is like a Japanese mochi sweet that's kind of put on a stick. There's three different, and it looked really easy to paint because it's just 3 balls in 3 cute colors. And I thought, you know what? I'll buy this. I'll use it as a practice subject. Bring it home. Once I finish painting it, I can eat it. It's great. It's like a win-win. And it was actually while I was painting that I kind of came to the realization that this is a good direction, because I had experience doing digital illustration in food, so I knew, and photography in food, so I knew shiny things make things look more delicious. If you're painting something brown, you need some sort of like green or red alongside it, because otherwise it's just blah. So I had this knowledge. There was need for it in Japan because there's a lot of love for gourmet food and just food in general here.
Yeah.
And it kind of gave me the excess or the extra benefit of being able to try and eat a bunch of different foods as well. And so it was like those 3 things that kind of came together. So I ended up spending the first, I think I was still working at my office at the time. I think it was the first half a year or so, building a portfolio of watercolor food illustrations before I decided to quit my office and start working as a food illustrator that way. Yeah.
Okay, so last question. One of the things we do on this show is every guest we have on, we get them to ask a question for the next guest, you know, and they never know like who the next guest is. But the last guest we had on wanted to ask you, what do you do to transfer or communicate culture to the world without changing it? And I'm sorry, that's like a super metaphysical question.
It is a super metaphysical question. Without changing it. I think, awareness is the number one thing, because I think a lot of people, especially people who love Japan, end up going on social media and they change what like the meaning of many of the cultures are. They try to attach a much deeper meaning to a lot of different things. I think they like to exotify stuff. And I think it's important to talk to the people who are actually doing these things. And in my mind, I guess change is sort of like adding on additional meaning to the things. So of course, things in Japan, many of the things have roots in specific cultural practices, but the current day person, for example, is going to have different thoughts and different feelings when they're experiencing the same thing. So things like itadakimasu when you say before you eat, which is like I am receiving this, actually has roots in, I believe it's Buddhism, that is saying that you're receiving the food from like the animals and the plants, but the day-to-day person is not going to be experiencing that same thing. Right. So I think it's very important when you're conveying that culture to be aware not only of what the roots are, but actually what the current person, the current average Japanese person, for example, is experiencing when they're also participating in certain aspects of the culture. And so I think the biggest thing is actually communicating with people of that culture, not just textbooks and not just information you find out online, but talking on day to day and being aware and being observant of how these people are actually interacting with this culture.
All right. So on that point, is there any question that you have or you would like to pose?
Okay, so now I was put on the spot. The question that I would like to pose for the next person would perhaps be, if you could take any aspect of your own home culture to Japan and sort of bring that into society. So it's the opposite question that I was just asked. Like, what aspect of your culture would you really wish to be implemented within Japan society?
Better Guinness for me.
Yeah. So we got your answer. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
This is 20 Minutes with Kailene Falls. Thank you for watching.